Oh, wow.
I think it's sort of like what they do in Montclair.
Right.
People live out in the state to house and have children, so. I don't know. When
All
some-
right, listen, if they decline this offer,
Well, they declined my offer, but.
they did, so,
But now, like, my client still wants it, so she still wants me to be on top of it, so
you have to stay on top of it. You
so
can't.
I'm
be
still
on top
gonna
of
give
it.
that to Jack.
Yeah, that's the best way to go, just to be fair and honest, and if he's not happy, no problem. You explain it to him, you're doing the best you can do.
And I feel badly when he's like, no way, I'm gonna use your husband.
All right, fine, no problem, that's fine, whatever's comfortable. Allison, can you open your?
Yep, it's all set. Your co-host.
Did I just grab
You got everything? All right, I sent you an email about missing paperwork for
Yes,
this listing.
yes,
Just
yes,
upload that.
yes.
Hi, Jackie. Hi, everyone. Judith will be with you shortly.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Jackie.
Good morning.
Nice to
Hi.
see you.
Good morning.
Good morning and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Awesome. Morning, Rebecca.
Hi, good morning.
You're gonna have an awesome crowd this morning. I love it. Morning, Helen.
Good morning.
Okay, Howard is here and someone named iPhone. Just change it to your first name, please, so we can have an intelligent conversation if you know how to do it.
Yes, I'm trying.
Okay, no problem. Take your time.
I think I changed it. Did you see my name?
Yeah, yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Sorry.
No problem whatsoever. It's fine. Stella is joining us. Sebastian, Amy. All right. Good morning, Stella. Happy
Hello.
New Year.
Happy New Year.
Starting out with learning. I love it. Alvar, thank you for joining us. I'm just going to give another minute to everybody. And then we'll get started. Just raise your hand if you have done a lease or a listing agreement for a rental before. Nobody. Okay, no problem. What you can do while I'm talking is put your questions in the chat or wait till the very end and we'll go over all the questions, whatever you're comfortable with. If you have a question right there and then, either just unmute yourself and ask the question. We'll discuss it. And we'll go from there. Okie dokie. I am going to get started and share my screen. And if you don't see my screen, just let me know. Otherwise, we'll move on. So this is rentals and leases, working with the landlord and or the tenant. That's why my slide is not working. Hold on. Okay. So first thing you need to do is determine your relationship. Are you going to work with the landlord or are you going to work with the tenant? If you work with the landlord, you will write up a listing agreement and all related documents. And that's what you'll prepare. You'll meet with him and discuss a lot of questions, and I will go over them in details. If you're working with the tenant, you'll be responsible for showing properties to the tenant, ask them to do a lease application, income verification, and more. And you might have the chance to become a disclosed dual agent when you take a rental listing, and then you have tenants who are not represented by anyone, and you'll be able to represent a tenant as well and become a disclosure agent. So disclosure is super important, including CIS and dual agency paperwork. So let's talk in detail about working with the landlord. This is when you will take a rental listing and put it in the MLS. So during your initial interview with the landlord, you will ask him a series of questions. What utilities are included in the rent? That is very, very important to the tenant. You'll ask him, is heat included? Is hot water included? What about water and electric? In a multifamily unit, you'll find out if these utilities are shared in the two family. Are there separate electric and heat for the two tenants? Are they together and they're sharing it 50-50? All of those are extremely important questions. You'll find out who takes care of the landscaping and snow removal. In some cases, it's the landlord, but a lot of times it's the tenant. So it's important to know who's taking the listing. What type of appliances are in place in the home or the apartment, a condo, and are they all in working order? Are pets allowed? Super, super important. What type of pets is the landlord allowing? Cats or dogs? And what size of dogs or cats? More important with the dogs, are there any other pets allowed? Some people have birds, parakeets, anything else. So ask the right questions. Is there laundry on the premises that the tenant can use, and where is the laundry? Is it on the first floor, second floor, basement? It's important. What type of parking is available for the tenant? If there's a garage, is the tenant allowed to use the garage? Is there a parking space, street parking, and how many cars can they use for parking? Additional questions that you need to ask. Is there a basement for the tenant's use? Is there storage space in the basement? You can also find out if the basement is finished or unfinished and what kind of condition is it in. Is it something that they can use for an additional family room or a playroom or a study or an office maybe? If there is a yard, does the tenant have the use of yard? In some cases, yes, some cases, no. Some cases it's shared with another tenant. Then the basic questions, how many bedrooms, how many baths, how many half baths does the property have? Also, is there a master bedroom with a master bath? It's also very important for a lot of people. Are there any areas of the home that are off limits to the tenant? That is super important. I took a rental listing once and there was an office off of the garage and that was not permitted for the tenant's use. So that might be a weird question if the whole house or apartment is available, but in a lot of cases, just find out if that is the case. And then finally, who pays the commission? So in most of New Jersey, the tenant pays the commission, and a lot of other states, the landlord does. So it will be important for you to get this question answered. And also a lot of landlords will chip in, maybe sharing the commission half and half in order to find a tenant faster, or they may pay the complete commission just to be in better competition with other listings. The commission equals 1 month's rent and it's divided equally between agencies. The listing agency and the leasing agency, the other one who represents the tenant. Okay, let's see. During your initial interview, you can also ask the landlord a couple questions regarding the lease, because as a landlord's agent, you will be preparing the lease. Does the landlord require a credit check, an interview, which can be done via Zoom or in person? Does he require an eviction history, a criminal background check, which we can very easily get through insidecredit.com. All that paperwork is available in .loop, and you can get a complete check for $35, which I think is an amazing deal. Does the landlord require 1.5 months security deposit? So New Jersey law states that the landlord can take up to 1.5 months of security, no more, but he can take less. Will he take a rental application? That's a very important piece of paperwork where the tenant's information, home address, references, current work, and income are listed. And that will give you a good idea about the tenant and what their background is. Does the landlord have his or her own lease, or can you use a standard New Jersey lease? So this is important for a lot of landlords who've been landlords for a very long time. They have crafted their own lease, and it's perfectly fine. A lot of them have checked it with an attorney and they approved it, so all they have to do is fill in the blanks. If they don't have their own lease, we can use a standard New Jersey lease. A few more things to let the landlord know. Most towns require a certificate of occupancy, which is the certificate that proves that the home or apartment is ready with smoke detectors, a fire extinguisher, and carbon monoxide detectors. And then you also need to share the Truth in Renting booklet with the landlord, which is available in .loop. So those of you who are taking notes, just know that I have this document in a PDF and I'm going to send it out to all of you. So don't worry if you miss any steps or don't get a chance to write it down, you will have the complete presentation. Okay, working with the tenant. When you work with a tenant, you also have a ton of questions to ask them when you start working with them. First, you will discuss your relationship and you supply them with a CIS form and a dual agency agreement. So you can let them know that you're working with them as a tenant's agent and a disclosed dual agent if the opportunity arises. So if you work for Keller Williams Town Life and you show other listings listed by Keller Williams Town Life, you automatically become a disclosed dual agent. So it is super important to have them sign a dual agency form. Also, if you're showing other properties that other KW Town Life agents are showing, you'll become a disclosed dual agent. Give them a lease application to fill out right away at the get-go. And this way they can fill it out, you can take a look and kind of figure out if they're in the right price range. It's like a pre-approval, almost like a mortgage pre-approval for a home purchase. This one will let you know how much they make, how much they spend, and how much they can afford for a rental. So it kind of puts you in the right place of what price range you should be looking at. Then you can explain to the tenant that the landlord is likely going to request a credit check, a criminal background check, an eviction check, and an interview along with the lease application. And at this point, only serious tenants will continue working with you. If they have an issue with a criminal background or they've been evicted, they might let you know, they might not let you know, but if they're not seriously looking, they'll probably stop calling you. Then it's super important for you to explain all the fees that are due at lease signing, which will be the first month's rent, the month and a half security, and 1 month's rent commission. So it comes to a total of 3.5 months rent, which is a hefty fee. So a lot of tenants are not aware of this, that all this is due at lease signing, and they'll be surprised. You'll see. This is why it's important for you to educate them and let them know that this amount is due at lease signing. And then payment is only accepted by bank check or money order. There are no personal checks accepted, and cash is never okay. You cannot accept any cash. You can always go to, the tenant can always go to the post office and get money orders. I think they still do that. And then you also need to get separate checks for the security, the first month's rent, and the commission for each real estate company. Now, if KW Town Life is representing both the landlord and the tenant, you don't need to get separate checks. One check will be fine. And in that case, you will get 3 checks, not 4. Additional general questions that you will ask the tenants are the following. What is your preferred location? What towns would you like to be in? Do you need to be close to New York City? Is transportation important to you? Do you prefer bus or train? Then in that case, you'll look for towns that have a train station or close to a bus. Do you want to be close to stores? If you don't have a car and want to be able to shop and walk to the stores, that will become important. Do you want to be away from highways? Also, what is your preferred housing? Do you want to be in a single family, a multifamily where you'll be sharing a home with another family or another person? Do you want to be in a condo or a high rise or in a building that has amenities, maybe a pool? All these questions are very important. Then again, the number of bedrooms, baths, and master bedroom, master bath. Is that something you really have to have, or it's okay to have a 4-bedroom, 3-bath home with no master bedroom and no master bath? Then what is your garage need? Do you need a garage? Do you need a parking spot? How many cars do you have? Do you want to use a yard? Is a laundry important to you, and does it have to be in the unit? If not, do you mind walking to a neighboring laundromat? And once you find out all that information, it's so much easier to put all the criteria right into the MLS and narrow it down to a much less properties than you would start with. So let's move on to what kind of paperwork you will need to work with the landlord. To get a listing, you will go to .loop and add a new loop for a landlord, which will be a rental listing loop. And the agreement will have the following. You will have a COVID-19 paperwork waiver that the landlord and the tenant will sign. You will have the landlord sign a listing agreement with a commission agreement. You'll share the Attorney General's memorandum. And that does not need to be signed anymore, but if they sign it, it's even better. And that talks about the fair housing laws and discrimination. You'll have them sign the CIS and the dual agency form and the lot pain disclosure, which is super important. So just remember, any housing, excuse me, built before 1978 needs a lot pain disclosure. It must have an address. It must be initialed in section 3ABC. They must check the proper points, and it must be signed both by the landlord and the agent. And the fine can be as high as $11,000 to $20,000 for a missing or incomplete lap paint. So they're not joking around with the lap paint. Then you can send them the buyer forward notice just to put the landlord on alert that if they're planning to make any payments between the landlord and tenant through wire, that there has been a lot of fraud lately, and it will just explain to them to be careful with emails that they get, to always call and double check on account numbers and be very, very careful. And then you have the Truth in Renting booklet there that you can share with the landlord. And it basically talks about landlord and tenant responsibilities and relationships and what is each party responsible for, what they need to do regarding different things, the deposit, the return of the deposit, behavior, having insurance, a lot of things. So I suggest that when you have some time, just take a look at the Truth in Renting booklet. It's a really amazing reading, and it's something that they should follow. So this is what your loop looks like in .loop. So it's got all the forms that I just discussed, the COVID-19 form, rental listing agreement, and all these documents will pull into your loop as soon as you open your new loop. Let's take a look at what kind of paperwork you'll need for the tenant. When you go to add a new loop, you're going to look for a tenant lease loop. It will include a COVID-19 waiver, but before you pull a blank one, you will probably have to have the one signed that is listed in the MLS. So when you go pull up an MLS listing, check what kind of documents are attached to the listing. And if they have a COVID-19 waiver that is already signed by the landlord, print that out, bring it to your showing, and have your tenant sign either before or at the showing. And that's the one you'll be using. There's instructions on that loop on how to request a credit check and criminal background check, so share it with your tenant. There's a lease application that they can fill out. There's also room for a co-applicant or a guarantor. And just remember, when there is an applicant and a co-applicant, they are both financially responsible for the lease payment. So let's say boyfriend and girlfriend move into a home, and girlfriend changes her mind 6 months on the relationship and moves out. Guess who's responsible for the lease payment? The boyfriend, because he's still living there. So as well as the girlfriend, but she's probably not going to pay. And in that case, the boyfriend is going to continue to have to pay. Now, if the applicant does not have enough funds or maybe just moved into the country, and there's a guarantor who will guarantee lease payment, and you can put the applicant and the guarantor under the co-applicant, and they both become financially responsible for the lease payment. And they both need to have a credit check, a criminal background check, and all of the information, as well as they both need to be at the interview if the landlord requests a meeting. You will find the window guard paperwork in there. It's mostly for high-rise building for children under a certain age. So some of them have been requesting, and it's the landlord responsibility to install window guards. The CIS and dual agency forms are there. The lead paint, which you'll have to take from the MLS. So when you go to look at a listing, a rental listing, if it was built before 1978, it should have a lead paint on the document section that was already filled out and signed by the landlord. That's the one you will download, add to your loop, and share with your tenant. So they're signing the same lead paint. You don't have your tenant sign a blank lead paint, because that's just not going to work. And then share the lead paint booklet with your tenant. Let them read it, let them know about it. You can also share the Truth in Renting booklet and give your tenant a W-9 form. The tenant will have to fill out this form in order to allow the landlord to open a security deposit bank account. And what happens is that bank account is a special account that will allow the tenant and the landlord to have access to it. Actually, the tenant does not have access, but the tenant gets the interest that occurs throughout the year, and they'll get that interest mailed to them at the end of the year. Okay, and that is what your tenant lease packet looks like in dot loop. That's all the documents we discussed. And once you add this to your loop, they're all there. All you have to do is share the proper ones with your tenant. All right, let's talk about lease preparation. How do you take a lease and how do you write up a lease? So the step-by-step process for writing up a lease is the following. Once the landlord accepts a qualified tenant, the landlord's agent will complete a lease. And that is done because the landlord's agent just knows more about the property and knows what the landlord's requirements are. So it's much easier for the landlord's agent to do so. However, I have run into some landlord's agents who completely say, no, if you want your tenant to get this property, you need to do the lease. And in that case, you will do the lease. So it's not a big deal. It's perfectly fine. It's just easier for the landlord's agent to do it. The next step will be, once the lease is complete, the landlord will first review, make changes with the agent, and then once the lease is approved, landlord will not sign. It will go to the tenant's agent, and first the tenant and the co-tenant or the guarantor will sign the lease. And once the landlord receives the lease with the tenant's signatures, the tenant's agent should deliver all checks to the landlord's agent. That includes the first month's rent, the month-and-a-half security deposit, and 1 or 2 commission checks based on how many agencies are involved. And then once that's all received, the landlord will sign the lease, and then your lease is complete. The tenant's agent will also provide the completed W-9 form from the tenant, and that will go along with the lease to the landlord. And the landlord's agent will mark the property leased in the NJMLS within 24 hours, and it will be completed. Now, just remember that the landlord and the tenant have a 3-day attorney review period to have the lease reviewed by an attorney. And this section is written right on top of the beginning of the lease. And it says, this is a legally binding lease that will become final within 3 business days. During this period, you may choose to consult an attorney who can review and cancel the lease. And you can see sections below. So usually most tenants and landlords will not take the time to have an attorney review the lease, plus it's very costly. And they'll just go ahead and start moving in, start making preparations, exchange keys, and all that stuff. So it's all fine. They don't have to hire an attorney, but they can. Okay, something new that popped up in September of 2020, actually. There is now an addendum that you can add to the lease that will allow pets to be in the property. And it says this addendum is attached and made part of the New Jersey Realtor Standard Form of Residential Lease. If this addendum conflicts with the lease, then the addendum shall control. And it has some really amazing sections. So tenant agrees that tenant will not have or keep any type of pet on the property without written authorization from the landlord. If the tenant has guests visiting, all rules concerning pets will apply to visiting pets. Tenant agrees to abide by the following rules and regulations regarding a pet. Nothing in this addendum will affect any rights that tenant has with regard to an assistance animal, which includes a support or service animal or to a working dog that is being kept by tenant as a member of police, fire, law enforcement, or other related emergency service agency. Assistance animals and working dogs are not pets. So always remember that if you have someone who has a support animal, a working animal, or an assistance animal, the no pet rule does not apply to them. So some of the landlords might have an issue with that if they don't want to have any pets at all. In that case, my suggestion is hire an attorney and discuss it with them. You better have a very good reason why you will not allow one. Also, just keep in mind if you have a complex or a home where they are allowed one pet and they have a service animal and another pet, that's considered one pet because the service animal or assistance animal is not counted. And then it goes into further details, which I love. Landlord hereby grants permission for tenant to have, keep, or allow others to bring the following pets upon the property. Is it a dog or a cat or other? Put the pet name down, the age of the pet, the breed of the pet, and their weight. And then proof of current vaccinations must be submitted annually to the landlord. They also have to have a license and a proof. And it goes into further details that the pet is not allowed to perform any bathroom activity within 100 feet of the property, that they have to have proper insurance, and just a lot of very good details. So my suggestion to you, whether you represent the tenant or the landlord, if they have a pet and you're working with the tenant, give this to them early on. Let them fill it out, let them have it ready, and give it to the landlord's agent when they have an interest in a property. Okay. Let's see. So at the end of the lease, you have room for common lease provisions, which will allow you to enter some additional statements. So these are some of the ones that I have used in the past 20 years, and they worked out really, really well. I always start with the secure deposit will not be used as rent payment. So the tenant needs to understand that just because he's given the landlord 1.5 months rent as security deposit, it's not for the use of the last month's payment or anything else. So right now we're in COVID time and there's an exception. Because we fell on hard times and a lot of tenants fell on hard financial times, the governor actually lifted this rule and they were allowed to use their security deposit as rent payment, which once they get themselves together financially, they'll have to put back. And then tenant must have tenant insurance policy during the full term of the lease, including any renewals. But when I share this with the tenant, they get a little scared. Oh my God, I don't want to pay for additional insurance. It's not a big deal. It's only a couple $100 and it will protect all their personal belongings in the apartment or in the home in case of a flood or fire or break-in, anything like that. So it's super important that the tenant has this insurance policy. A lot of times it will even protect the jewelry. So have them look into it. For a home, I had a 2-bedroom, 2-bath home that I rented and my tenant insurance was about $300 about 10 years ago. So I don't think it went up much. It's really a couple of $100 for the year. It's highly recommended and most landlords will require you to have it. And the next section covers appliances. I always like to put a note in there that landlord warrants that all appliances are in good working order and tenant agrees to return all appliances in good working order except normal wear and tear. If any appliance is not functioning properly within the first 3 weeks after occupancy, the landlord will be responsible for having said appliance repaired. So this is just a starting point of what you can write about the appliances. It doesn't have to be 3 weeks, it can be 2 weeks, it can be a month, but it's something you need to bring up with the landlord. Make sure that all appliances are in working order. Obviously, they're going to use them, so normal wear and tear is fine. And then if anything breaks down, within the first couple of weeks, the landlord will fix it. But if it happens after that, the tenant will be financially responsible for some of that repair. And that's what the next paragraph covers. Tenant is responsible for the first $100 of each repair unless the damage is caused by the tenant's misuse or negligence, in which case the tenant will be responsible for the entire repair. So the $100 is just an idea. If it's a small apartment, 1 to 2 bedrooms, that will be fine. If they're renting a bigger home with a lot more appliances, some landlords will ask for up to $150 for each repair. And that's okay, but like $200-300 would be too much or excessive because for that amount you can buy new appliances, and that's not the point of having this clause or having the tenant in the home. So just be careful with the numbers that you use and you need to be reasonable. So what does this mean? Let's say they're using the dishwasher and the dishwasher starts leaking and it's broken, it needs to be repaired. So the landlord will arrange for a repairman, whether it needs to be replaced or repaired, the tenant will pay for first $100 and the landlord will cover the rest of the cost. And the next one talks about maintenance. Now this relates back to your first interview with the landlord. And in the lease, you will specify who takes care of the landscaping and who takes care of raking out the leaves, watering, mowing. You don't have to be specific, but some landlords require you to be specific about what property maintenance is included. So you can say tenant is responsible for landscaping and maintenance of the property, and you can just stop right there. And if they want to go further and make sure that everything is covered, you can say including, but not limited to mowing, watering, weeding, and raking the leaves. Or if it's the landlord, you'll say landlord is responsible for landscaping. Because some of the landlords have already maintenance contracts with landscapers, and it's so much easier. They'll just come every 2 weeks, every week, however they're contracted and take care of it. And the next one is tenant and landlord is responsible for snow or ice removal. So it's either one or the other. And it's usually the tenant who will be responsible for snow removal. It's just easier because they live there, unless the landlord has a contract with a company who will take care of that. And then we have more. Premises will be occupied by Mr. Smith, his wife, Mrs. Smith, and their 2 children at the names of the children and date of birth. Why is that important? Well, the number of people who live in the home is important because the fire department always likes to know who occupies each unit or the home. The name and date of birth of the children is important because the towns will require the lease as proof of occupancy in order for the kids to go to school. You can add additional provisions such as no smoking on premises, no pets allowed on the premises, or if the landlord will allow a small dog or a cat, specify what that dog and pet is and attach a photo to the lease. So it happened to me before where I did a lease for one of my agents and they had a photo of a dog. It was a very small dog. And a month after they moved in, it was a completely different breed of dog that they were living with. So it was an issue. And it's scary that people would do that. So be very specific and now use the addendum that I talked about. Landlord will provide a CRO, CCO prior to tenant moving in. That is the certificate of occupancy I talked about, which is the landlord's responsibility. Put a clause in there. The tenant will allow showings of the property in the last 60 days of their tenancy when the property is listed for sale or rent. Tenants will be given ample notice for showings and agree to cooperate with the listing agent and keep the premises clean and organized during showings. So you're putting the tenant on alert right away before they move in, that when it's ready for them to leave and you're gonna list it for sale or rent, they'll cooperate with you. Same way that the previous tenant was cooperating with you so they were able to see that apartment. So 60 days is normal. Some tenants will not agree only to 30 days and that will be fine as long as the landlord agrees. So work that out. Whatever is working for everyone is fine. Premises will be freshly painted and room cleaned before occupancy. It's something you can add unless it's already clean and freshly painted. You don't have to add it again. Tenant is responsible for having the gutters cleaned twice a year, one in the late spring and once in late autumn. So you don't have to put this in. However, I've had a lot of landlords add this paragraph for me for their leases because when the gutters are not cleaned, what happens? We have big rain, the gutters clog up, and there's a flood coming down the walls and it starts raining inside the house and it becomes very costly to repair. So a lot of landlords will just do it themselves because it's important for the upkeep of the home. If they're not, just check with the landlord and make sure that that is done. And then there is a clause inside the lease that talks about renewals. And it says that the landlord will give a tenant a chance to renew the lease, but some landlords like to be specific about that. So you can add a clause that says something like this. Tenant has the option to renew the lease for a second year and then be specific with what that year is at a monthly rent of what amount, due and payable on the first day of each month with the same terms and conditions during lease extension. So you can add this clause if they agree to a second or even a third year. Maybe you're writing up a 2-year lease and they say, what if I want to stay for the third year? You know, I'm paying now $2,100, but I'm willing to pay $2,200 if I can stay another year. And that's fine. Be specific and make a note of it. Okay, let's see what else I have. All right, I want to touch up on eviction for a moment. So we all know that the governor lifted eviction procedures, but just know that after that is over, unfortunately, it's going to hit a lot of people. So I want you to be aware of the following things. The landlord may not evict a tenant without a court ruling. So they can't just say, okay, you're out of here, you gotta leave. If they start eviction procedure, it has to go through court. And if the tenant can show hardship, the court may allow them as long as 6 months to stay in the same unit, apartment, or house until they find something. So there's 2 different types of evictions, which I'm sure a lot of you have not heard of the first one. One is constructive eviction, when the landlord fails to provide basic services. And the consequences are that the tenant must vacate, move out, or stop paying rent. So what does that really mean? So about 15 years ago, I was renting a house in Tenafly, and the pipe broke in the kitchen, and I had no running water in the kitchen. And I contacted the landlord over and over again, and it was a very, very old house, and he just did not want to deal with it. So I paid another month of rent, and after that, I started looking for a new property. It became really, really difficult with 2 small kids to be in the kitchen with no running water. And I then moved out. So that was constructive eviction because the landlord wasn't taking care of the house, and it made it very difficult for me to have those living conditions. It was done and over with. Now, the most commonly known is the actual eviction, when the tenant breaches the lease, and that could be for several reasons. Non-payment of the rent is the most common, or the tenant's disorderly conduct, in which case the tenant is not behaving, they're partying all the time, they're drinking, they're doing illegal activities, a whole list of things. The tenant must be given a 3-day notice before the lawsuit is filed, and then they can go to court and start eviction procedure. Or there's destruction or damage due to the tenant's negligence, and that could be damage to the kitchen, to the appliances, windows broken, something, could be anything. Tenant continues to violate landlord's regulations if it included in the lease. And that could be not taking care of the property if the landlord tells the tenant that it's their responsibility. The grass is overgrown, it's 2 feet all the time, the neighbors are complaining, the town is calling, any of that. Breach of any reasonable covenant of the lease agreement. Tenant could be living in a building, and the building has a lot of regulations that they have to follow. If they breach those regulations over and over again, the landlord has the right to start eviction procedure. And there's a lot more, but these are the most common. So I just wanted you to be aware of it. It's being questioned a lot. All right, other frequently asked questions that come up a lot. Lease with option to buy. So if you hear that, what does that mean? That means that the landlord and the tenant agree to lease the property, but the tenant really likes the property, and although he can't buy it now, he's thinking in the future he would like to buy it. Live there for a year or 2, and then he'll probably be able to save enough money to purchase the property. So the best way for you to protect yourself is let the landlord and tenant talk about it. Have them sit down in a meeting, have them write up a lease, and then write up a contract, a purchase agreement, and have them talk to an attorney. So we are limited when it comes to all these legal issues and legal questions. So don't ever forget, we're not attorneys. We can advise them on what to do. So you can do a standard lease and you can do a standard contract, and it's best then to run this scenario by an attorney. Let them work out the rest of it. Section 8, A lot of questions about Section 8. My landlord doesn't want to accept the Section 8. My tenant is Section 8, I'm having trouble leasing something. So don't forget that Section 8 is a legal form of payment. The government pays part of the rent or all the rent based on how they qualify. And actually, the landlord can only win with this because they get a check like clockwork every single month, and it's guaranteed payment. They're almost better off with a Section 8 than someone off the street that they don't know, because they don't know if those people are going to make the rent. So they're not allowed to discriminate against Section 8 payment. It's a legal form of payment. Questions about prorating the lease for additional days or weeks and how to calculate the payment. So let's say it's now January 4th. You find a tenant for a property and they want to move in January 20th. And then you have 10 days left of January. And the lease starts January 20th, but they would like to stay that 10 days and an additional year. So in the lease, when you're filling it out, the lease term will be 12 months plus 10 days. And you calculate the 10 days by taking the monthly rent, dividing it by 30 days, and times additional days. So it's going to be $2,000 monthly rent divided by 30 times 10 days, and there's your extra payment. What is an acceptable late fee? So if they're late with their payment, which is usually due either on the 1st or the 15th of the month, depends on when they move in, then the late fee is usually $50 to $100, or some landlords require a daily late fee. So that would be $25 a day, $50 a day, or whatever the landlord wants. So double check with them. I once had tenants who had a big problem with this, and we could not agree on a late fee. And I was shocked by that. Why were they hung up on a late fee? They're not supposed to be late. So if this is going to be an issue, right away, that's a red flag that they probably were late a lot in the past and they're just not going to be on time with rent payment. And guess what happened? After 2 weeks of going back and forth of what the late fee should be, the landlord said, no, thank you. I'm not dealing with these people. Moved on to someone else. Lease renewal. When it comes to renewing the lease, it's a very simple written agreement between the landlord and the tenant, and an agent does not need to be involved, and there is no need to do a new lease agreement. So let's say you have a tenant who leased a property for a year, and at the end of the year, she really wants to stay, and there's nothing in her lease, and there's nothing to move by with. She'll contact the landlord and say, I really want to leave her for another year. The landlord will write up a simple agreement that says, I allow the tenant to stay for another year, specify the date, specify the lease amount, and just say, as per terms of the original lease, and that will be fine. They'll both sign off on it. Just remember, it must be in writing. Then month-to-month lease, what is that? So oftentimes, the tenant is leasing a property and the end of the lease, they can find anything. They don't have a lease, but they continue paying the lease amount, the rental to the landlord. They automatically become month-to-month tenants. And there's no agreement needed to be given. The only thing they have to do and they're responsible for is a 30-day notice to give to the landlord that they finally found something and they're ready to move out. Very common question, and it comes up a lot. If you're working with a tenant who has poor credit, but they have some money saved and they can pay 6 months rent in advance, let's say, can they do that? Answer is yes, but you cannot write up a 1-year lease with 6 months paid upfront. And why is that? Because anything over a month's rent will go towards the security deposit. So if they're giving you 6 months rent on a 1-year lease, that means they're paying 1 month rent and 5 months security deposit. And they all learned that the security deposit cannot be more than a month and a half. So in order to make that somewhat legal, is to write up a lease that is a 6-month lease and it's paid in full, and that will be fine. This way, they're not giving advance rent, they're not giving additional security. It will count as a lease that is paid off in one term. All right, I want to touch up on the Attorney General's addendum. But don't forget, excuse me, that it's not only that you need to give this addendum to your landlord when he's signing the listing, you need to let them know and put them on alert that they cannot discriminate against sexual orientation, familial status, race, national origin, religion, gender, physical or mental disability, liability or service for the armed forces, and so on. And there's a section right here. Source of lawful income includes Section 8 housing, choice vouchers, state rental assistance programs, temporary rental assistance. So don't forget that. And another section there says a no pets rule cannot be enforced against a person with a disability who has a service or guide animal. A landlord may also not charge a tenant with a disability an extra fee for keeping a service or guide animal. Another thing I want to let you know that a landlord cannot charge pet security deposit. There's no such thing. If they have a pet and the landlord is not really set on accepting that pet, what the landlord can do is charge additional rent, let's say another $100 every month for that pet. And that will increase the security deposit amount, but it can never be more than a month and a half rent payment. Okay. So I'm going to go to the next section, which is check your knowledge. So you can all unmute yourself and let me know what the answers are. So based on what we just discussed, what is the maximum amount of security deposit, if any, that the landlord may require from a tenant in a residential lease? A, there's no set amount. B, equal to 1 month's rent. C, equal to 1.5 months rent. Or D, no more than 2 months rent.
C.
C.
Very good, correct.
बोले आवाज तुम करो.
Say that again, I didn't hear you. Okay, let me go to the next question. Oh, wait, I skipped one. Number 2, if a landlord fails to provide heat to an apartment and the tenant is forced to vacate the premises, this is an example of abandonment, actual eviction, constructive eviction, or lesser negligence. Which one?
C.
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 Very good. Number 3, what is the most effective way to ensure that tenants pay their rent on time? A, hire an enforcement officer to collect the rents. B, managers should stop by every unit several times a month. C, make careful tenant selection in the first place. D, set low rental rates. Which one?
C.
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 Correct. Let the landlord know you should make very careful tenant selection in the first place. It's the only way to guarantee that will be paid. Number 4, an owner leases her house to a friend for 5 years. 1 year later, the owner decides to sell her home. In this situation, A, the lease is terminated because of the sale. B, the new owner has the option of evicting the tenant or renegotiating the lease. C, the lease is not affected by the sale and the new owner becomes the landlord. And D, the tenant must renegotiate her lease with the new owner. Which one?
C.
C.
Correct. It is C. The lease is not affected by the sale of the home and the new owner becomes the landlord. But don't forget, if you're selling a home where there is a tenant, there's a section in the contract that asks you that question. And this is why they ask the question. Is there a tenant on premises? And do they have a lease? And what is their lease term? When the owner is selling that property, the tenant stays in place. They have a right to stay until the end of their lease. And number 5, tenant moved out of the home at the end of the lease term. What time period does the landlord have to return the tenant's security deposit? A, landlord does not need to return the security deposit. B, immediately by bank check or money order. C, 30 days from the last day of tenancy. And D, 2 weeks from the last month of tenancy.
C.
C.
The 30 days from the last days of tenancy. Absolutely. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I am ready for questions. Who has any questions about all that we talked about?
I have a quick one. When you're doing a sale, it's very, easy to identify when to change the statuses in the MLS.
Yes.
When you're doing a rental, like you're active, and then when do you change it from active to either under contract or?
So from active, will go to ARIP. And usually you mark it ARIP when the tenant submitted a lease application to the landlord and lease is pending, but they're still working out details on a lease. Then you can mark it ARIP. If you get lease applications that are not qualified, it's not going to work out, you don't have to change the status. Once the landlord says, I like this tenant, he can pay for the property, and let's start working on the lease. That's when you mark it ARIP. And then you're going to mark it leased the day they signed the lease. And when you mark it leased, it will say lease date. And when the tenant is moving in, the moving in date. So it's going to be probably different, and that's fine.
So it'd be the lease date.
Yes.
Okay. And there's no UC for that.
There's really no UC. It goes ARIP and then leased. Because there's no on the contract, they really don't go to attorneys. I think I met 2 people in the last 20 years who used an attorney.
Okay.
And what happened in that case was the tenant was very, very picky. And at some point I turned around and said, listen, I think it's best that you work this out with an attorney. And I stepped away. So I let the attorney write up the lease. I waited until everybody signed it because at that point we don't get involved. Once I got a signed lease back from the attorney, that's when I marked it in the MLS, that it was leased, and just followed the questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? All right, I have one question for everybody. Let's say you go to a listing appointment and you talk to the landlord. He shows you the home. Everything is fine. Beautiful home, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. You love it. Ready to sign the paperwork. And the landlord says, FYI, I don't want any blue people moving into my home, which has happened to me, and my heart dropped to my knees and I almost died. What do you do?
Leave the contract. Leave.
You don't take the contract.
You don't take the listing, correct? First of all, you let them know that you must follow fair housing rules, which you cannot discriminate against race and a million other things. And if they don't agree, you're going to say, thank you, but I cannot take the listing, and you walk away. Okay? So never, ever, ever participate in any discrimination. If there's any sign that the landlord is leaning this way or that way, I don't want pregnant women moving in, I don't want young children moving in here, you cannot do that. Okay? You walk away. It's not worth a lawsuit. It's not worth losing your license for a couple $100. So never forget that. Okay, any other questions? No? Did we learn a lot today?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes?
Great.
I hope so. I hope so. Just know that I'm here for you.
thank
So
you.
if you have any questions, you meet with a landlord, oh my God, this I never heard of. You're working with a tenant, they have a lot of questions, you don't know what to do. Email me, call me, I'm happy to help you. Okay? Whether you're in my office or not, it doesn't matter. Just reach out to me and I'm happy to hold your hand. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Thank you
you.
so much. Great to see you all and good luck.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.